you.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us today and how the brain learns to read. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and my mission. I'm dedicated to making a difference in the field of literacy for learners of all ages and neurodiverse brain types. I was a special education teacher for 34 years, and I continue to be very interested in that area. I'm dedicated to increasing awareness of how the brain acquires reading and what happens when the brain struggles to do so, such as with dyslexia and sometimes ADHD, sometimes autism. I'm dedicated to advancing the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned instruction that aligns with research on how the brain's reading circuitry actually works. And here are some of my beliefs. I believe that reading proficiency, including decoding, is the most important academic skill in both elementary and secondary school. I taught at the high school level, and I encountered so many kids who really struggled to read, and that bothered me, and I wanted to continue to learn how can we affect these children early, and if we get them while it's late, we can still make a difference. And I believe that with the right methodology, all students can be successful in reading, no matter their social class, economic status, or background. And I feel we need to understand and own our literacy numbers with the demographics and know that drastic changes can happen. We have to work as a team. I feel that there's a need to move to empirically supported strategies for teaching students to become proficient readers. And I believe that teachers and educational leaders need to learn how the brain learns to read, write, and spell, and teach to this end. Here's a slide, and it's Stanislav Dehaene, and he wrote this book, and I've got a copy here. I don't know if you could see this, but it's Reading in the Brain. And he feels that there's nothing that a little bit of science cannot help. And I would agree with that. But his major premise is that parents and educators need to have a better understanding of what's happening in the brain and the changes that are made when the brain learns to read. And he makes a very interesting premise as well. He feels that with this increased knowledge of these circuits, that the teacher's task would be lightened. So today we're basically doing a flyover. We're going to be going over a lot of material. But I hope that you learned something and that you are inspired in the field of literacy and prevention of illiteracy. So what you see here is a brain, obviously, but what's lit up here is the speech part of the brain. And learning to speak is natural. When you are born, you come with vision, you come with speech, but the brain has to do backflips in order to learn to read. And as you can see on the screen, the speech part is lit up, but the back of the brain, which is instrumental for reading, it's dark here. And that's because this person is not using the reading part of the brain. And this would be what our brain would be like in an oral society. And teaching reading, that's our job, and that's what parents expect. May we do it well. So let's go to the definition of reading. What is reading? And it's a process, and the brain of a reader takes symbols and changes those symbols from text into words. And then the meaning is attached to those words. And that's our goal in reading. It's to read for meaning, not just to bark at words. To learn to read and spell, we have to connect our visual system with our spoken language system. Now, what you're seeing on this slide is the area of the eye, so the visual, but the back of the brain with reading also becomes a visual system. And that's what we have to do to read. And if remember the other slide, the previous one, the back of the brain was not lit up. But on this one, you can see the back of the brain is lit up. So the visual system connects from the eye to the back of the brain, and then it incorporates the sounds, our spoken language. Now here we've got a picture of the brain, and I'm going to ask you to work with me with your left hand. So take your left hand, and the front, the blue part here is the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is used for a lot of hard thinking. It monitors, let's say something's really boring and you have to pay attention. The frontal lobe does that. It is involved in pre-planning. It's involved in thought processes and so on. But it's also very big in speech sounds. And that would be like right about here. And that would be Broca's area. Okay, now going back, put your thumb in front of your ear and your hand in the back. That would be the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe, it's involved with various things, but meaning is a big part of it here. If you had a stroke in the speech part area, your speech would be affected, but you would be able to still understand. In the temporal lobe, you would be able to speak, but you wouldn't be making much sense. Okay, and now going up to the parietal lobe, that also is involved with meaning, but it's also where your brain puts sounds together. It's like an assembly place. And then in the back of the brain, that's your occipital lobe. And that's where your letter box is. And it also goes into your temporal lobe as well. So I want to talk a little bit about neural connectivity here. And what is neural connectivity? So connectivity, the root word there is connection. So neural connectivity is when the brain parts are connecting, and they connect so that you're able to read. And then what is the speech to print methodology? That's a methodology or a method that engages the parts of the brain to read, the visual system, the sound system, the orthographic system, and the meaning system. And speech to print methodology believes that we don't just start with letters, we start with oral language and with sounds, and we really build up the sounds, and then we connect it to print. And print is very, very important, and it helps hugely with connecting the brain. But speech first, then print. Now what you're seeing here is this is time activation. And what this is, it's the visual area in the back of the brain. And you can see that's obviously a long way from the eyes, but the person is encountering the written word here. And then it grows and it grows and it grows. And that's what the brain would look like on reading. That's the left side of the brain. Let me go back just a second. This first slide would be what it would be like if a person couldn't read or if they were illiterate. And you can see that there's great brain activation here, and it's getting into the speech area as well. So the orthographic processor, that on your slide here, this would be the bluish area, bluish green area. And it's in the occipital, which means, the back of the brain, and then going into your temporal. And what it does is it stores automatic words. So when we're talking about the brain dictionary or the orthographic processor, what happens is once the word is heard or read, then the brain connects the letters, the graphemes, and the sounds. And that's the back of the brain. And if you can think of it as it's just an automatic area with enough work. This is where your automatic words are kept. And if someone likes to know names of things, it's in the left lateral occipital temporal area. It's part of the fusiform gyrus. And as you can see, this purple area, that would be the phonological processor in the inferior frontal gyrus, and that's the area that processes sounds. That would be the area that would be just speaking, but for reading, we utilize it. And the pink area is the meanings area, or semantics. So there's 4 neural processors that are used in reading. And when I was in high school, teaching high school, I would hear things like, oh, he's not processing that well, or he has auditory processing problems. And I got it, not completely, but I went back after I retired for another master's, and that was in the science of reading. And I began to learn some of these models that I'm going to be sharing with you. So the phonological processor, that's the sound box. And then the brain dictionary, that's in the back. And then the green area is the phonics assembly. That's where put sounds and letters together. And then the blue would be context and meaning processors. And that's in both the temporal and the parietal lobes. This is just another model. Let me go back to that. Where the phonological processor, that's the sound, the speech sound system, we're connecting it with the letters, and that's the orthographic processor. So what happens is the sounds speak to the letters. That's the connection there. And then we go up to the meaning processor, and then even further to the content processor. So this would be what we would call the phonics area, where the phonological processor is speaking to the orthographic processor. And as you can see on the screen, there's writing, and that's an output, and reading is an input. The vocabulary would be in this meaning processor. So what you're seeing on with this slide is the brain on spelling, and the purple part is on the left. That was a lesion. And this slide is, oh, I guess you would say like many people together, and then they like put it in like an average, but that would be a lesion. And you can see there's not as much activity. And on the right, it's scattered. So spelling is what we call encoding, and spelling is harder. It's a more challenging task than decoding. So to spell, you have to take the letters apart. And so you have to encode them, as opposed to reading, where you're blending them and then you're decoding them. We feel that spelling is very, very important. And I know in some schools, they're de-emphasizing it. But as far as building the brain for reading, spelling is an integral part. It works the brain, and it lays down these pathways, and it really builds the orthographic processor. And the thought process is, if you can spell it and you know what it means, you can read it. But we don't feel that just any spelling words. We feel there should be a scope and sequence, and children learn to read in phases, and they learn to spell in phases. Spelling often comes later, but we try to tie that together. On the right, you can see a little boy's writing example, and I'm going to be telling you a story in a little bit. But let me, first of all, this is Lene Aries, and she talks about the phases of reading and their spelling, but this is a little bit more reading. So first of all, pre-alphabetic, that's when you don't know your letters at all. And then partial alphabetic, you do know some. Full alphabetic, you're definitely learning them, but your spelling is still might be a little sketchy. And consolidated, you got it. Now what you see here, this person, bless their heart, wrote 12 words, and they capitalized twice. I'm thinking either they have some advanced knowledge or they got a little bit of help, but 12 words, and 5 of them were misspelled. But this person represented the sounds pretty well. I can see a big cat. So C, you can see there, they got the E, but they didn't have the orthographic knowledge that there should be 2 E's. And big, it didn't represent the vowel. And every word has to have a vowel. And this is playing, but that's pretty darn good for an early writer, playing. And then with, and a lot of young brains hear or represent the TH with an F. And ball, once again, didn't represent the short vowel sound. So that would be considered partial alphabetic. Okay, so my goal was to show you a few slides, and then I want to tell you a story now. In the deep pine-scented woods of southern Illinois, a boy was camping with his grandfather. And after a day full of adventure and wildlife, they were seated contentedly around a roaring, crackling campfire when the boy asked his grandfather, "Grandfather, will you tell me a story?" And this is a story about how his beloved grandson learned to read. Once upon a time, when you were an unborn baby, you heard sounds from your mother's body and words while you were still in your mother's womb. When birthed, you recognized these voices from your family, even my voice. Your caregivers were smarter than the average bears and knew that your brain was under development for oral language. Other than flooding you with words, we read to you, played with you, sang to you, and your vocabulary and oral language grew and grew. We didn't completely understand it, but we were building up the sound understanding part of your brain that you would need for later reading. And it has a fancy name, the phonological processor. It's like a sound box located in the front left side of the brain. You know that grandma has trouble with her speaking because she had a stroke in this area, Broca's area. You also know that she can understand speech. So I thank you, grandson, for still telling her about your days and reading to her. Somehow we figured out that babies will only code sounds if a person is speaking to them. You were lucky because we didn't just plop you in front of a TV or video. Well, usually we didn't. Since our family is bilingual, you coded both these languages. It was simply natural. This was good use of your gray matter because this is the optimal time that the ability to distinguish sounds from other languages is strong. And then it starts to diminish. You can still speak and read both languages. Bravo. Increasingly, you were understanding what people were saying. And so the meaning processor of your brain shared center stage with your phonological processor. All along your growth cycle, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, and on, we saw your oral language grow. When you were 12 months old, we counted your words. You had about 50 words. And when you were 3, you recognized about 1,000 words. Your inquisitive self began asking a lot of questions. A lot. You wanted to know why? Let me tell you a little bit about what happens in your brain when you read. And I learned about this later. But let's just say that the word dog is spoken. Well, the phonological processor, that's the sound box, recognizes the sounds of d, ah, g. And you smart little thing, knew what a dog was because the meaning processor had stored it. Well, time passes and you're adding inches and laying down neural pathways. Your parents, wise birds that they were, continued to develop your language and phonemic awareness by reading to you, singing, segmenting sounds, playing with rhymes, going to museums, and explaining things. Do you remember them saying, use your words when you got frustrated? So time goes on and you're now in preschool playing with sounds, being flooded with words, and on the carpet for story time and snack time. Ah, life was good. On to kindergarten, and you're sailing through because your vocabulary word count was about 10,000 words. And you were a confident little tyke. Your wise teacher I can't remember his name. Nah, I can't remember a lot of things. But your wise teacher told you that to learn to read, and you really, really wanted to learn to read, you must learn the 44 sounds, and that letters are important. But the letter is just a symbol for a sound, just like the golden arches are a symbol for McDonald's. You were learning the alphabetic principle. It's like sounds and letters talk to each other. You delighted in your writing, and so did I. I still have some of your early treasures. Your teacher started you out with lowercase letters, first emphasizing the sounds. And you systematically wrote the letters while saying the sounds. When you got stuck on a sound or what letter represented it, you just looked up at the sound wall and the letter formation posters. And of course, your teacher had many, many games up his sleeve. A new processing system was being built in your brain. We'll call it the letterbox. The letterbox only works when it sees letters, because letters make sounds. The letterbox doesn't activate when you see numbers or shapes, just letters. Your wise teacher showed you letters in different fonts, and you played matching games with your phonograms written in different fonts. He wisely knew that he was helping to build your brain for reading, and he used to tell you fun brain facts. He told your class, and you would always come home and tell me these brain facts as well, while we shared milk and cookies. Now, give me a couple minutes here, maybe just a couple seconds to remember some of those that you told me. Let me think. I remember. The letterbox used to be used for recognizing faces in your brain, but when you became a reader, face recognition moves to the right side of the brain. I know there was more. He also told you the letterbox, which you were not born with, but had to develop, is so important because without it, reading would be very, very challenging. He told us, he told you, and you told me, that developing the letterbox is our job. And that job, it can be fun. Oh yeah, I remember another one. He told you that you should not try to memorize words, but deeply learn them so they can be automatic words. And how do you do this? You learn them by sounding them out, writing them, saying them, and using them in a sentence. You loved class time because you really wanted to become an independent reader and writer. You kept hearing, eyes on the words, sound out the words, don't guess. By writing letters and spelling, you became more automatic, and your reversals became fewer and fewer. Your teacher gave the class an assessment. I think it was called universal screening. But I do remember he kept monitoring your progress. So he knew that you were not on the watch list, but you suspected that many of your classmates were. I remember going to an open house, and I could do that because I lived in the house. I went to this open house with your parents, and the teacher told us how our and your brain works for reading. He told us that when we read words, the brain sees the words. For example, dog, the visual system activates. Then the letterbox says, those are letters. Then the sound area is at work decoding dog. And the meaning processor kicks in saying, I know what a dog is. All processors working together for reading: visual, letterbox, sounds, and meanings. Your wise teacher did a comparison and said that learning to read is like going to the gym and building up our muscles. He said that we must get our repetitions in to be a strong reader. Get in your reps, he said. He said different learning brains needed different amount of reps. And that was fine. We just need to provide those reps. He demonstrated his workout plan for building up the reading and writing neural muscles, starting with foundational skills and decodable readers that allowed his students to practice word study skills, writing and spelling. He also showed us that the great books he had in his library that he had been reading to his students during class to build vocabulary and comprehension skills. He encouraged caregivers to continue reading literature that was a higher level than the kiddos could read on their own, because this would continue to build the reading brain. Okay, enough. My story comes to a close. Let's make another some more. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a book, and it's supposed to be like a magic book, but this is kind of a metaphor. But imagine a magic book that needs two separate keys. One won't open the book, two are needed. So this magic book needs two separate keys to unlock the secret of reading. What are they? So we're going to go on to a model that I learned, and hopefully a lot of you have been introduced to this, but we're going to delve into it a little bit to understand reading. And the idea is, how does one understand what is read and what is the relationship? So in 1986, there were two researchers who got together and they tried to figure this out. This was in Texas. And what they came up with is that it's just simple, kind of, but that the two keys are, you have to have word recognition. So this is the decoding in the blue. You have to be able to decode a word or to unlock the word or unlock the book. But as you can see, it's a multiplier. This is a mathematical equation that has two factors. And the quotient is reading comprehension. So the first key is you have to be able to decode the word. And the second key is that you have to have comprehension of language. Now this part, pretty much the word recognition is cut and dried, but the language comprehension has been bantered around. But for right now, I would like to just think in terms of, if something was read to you and you were listening, at what level are you understanding it? So it includes vocabulary. It includes semantics. It would include morphology. And so as you can see, this is a multiplier. And what you're seeing on the screen here is that any product less than 1, the student is going to have poor comprehension. And remember, Comprehension is the goal of reading. So there's going to be some struggle there. And I just put in half, but someone could put in 0.8 or, a fourth. Now, at the top, if the person has both decoding skills and good listening comprehension or language comprehension, they'll be an average reader. Going down, if they're a good decoder, so they got a 1, but they don't understand the language, their listening isn't very strong, they're going to get a half, and hence they're going to struggle. Now, who are the people who have good decoding, but not strong listening? There's a term some of you may know, hyperlexic, and that's a person who is adept at reading words, but they don't necessarily understand all the words that they're reading, but they're a good decoder. Going down, this is the person who is poor at decoding, but their language skills are very good. Now, this might be a dyslexic. In a dyslexic profile, the dyslexic struggles with phonology, with that sound box, and decoding is usually challenging for them, but their listening comprehension is often very, very good. But as you can see, we have a half. So if you can't read something, you're going to have trouble with the comprehension, the reading comprehension. Okay, this would also be a person who is a beginning reader. A beginning reader doesn't have very strong decoding skills yet. So, this could even be 0. But the idea is their reading comprehension isn't going to be there. And then on the bottom, this is the person who is a poor decoder and poor in comprehension. And they're going to need a lot of work. This next slide, and I know the resolution is not very good, but it maps it out once again. So here is the word recognition process on the left, and word decoding. So here's the dyslexic, poor at decoding, but good with language comprehension. And then top right, they're the typical reader, they're average or good with understanding the language and decoding. And like we spoke before, the hyperlexic would be the person who they're good at decoding, but don't understand the language. And here, the general reading disability, they're both, they're poor in both areas. So how do we teach reading? This is a slide that there you see pillars, and there's 5 basic pillars that we need to teach. If we're teaching reading well, we're hitting all of these. Phonemic awareness, phonics, we're working on fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. We need to hit them all. And the phonemic awareness and the phonics is more of a building block. And if we turned these pillars sideways and it was a ladder, the phonemic awareness and the phonics, that comes at the beginning. Those are foundational skills. And then after that, we can work more on the vocabulary fluency, and never disregarding them, just more influence on them at the beginning. And I got this from the National Council on Teaching Quality, and this was in 2020. They did a survey and they found that only 53% of teacher prep programs cover these pillars. So I'm like, okay, well, if our teachers aren't learning them in their prep program, then we're gonna need to be hitting them in professional development. Very important. So you see a triangle here, and at the top is comprehension. So comprehension is very, very important, but you can't get there until you do all of these others. All of this works together for reading. So the brain has to be built starting with oral language and sounds, and then that's the base of the triangle. Phonemic awareness is a skill that can be taught without letters. It can be taught, as they say, in the dark. It's just a lot of work with sounds. Now, some people do put letters in when they're working with phonemic awareness, but it can be done without letters. And then you see phonics, and decoding comes after that. But phonics is really when you're introducing letters. So the phonemic awareness is the sounds. The phonics is when the letters and the sounds talk to each other. And it's the idea that letters represent sounds. Hopefully you've seen this before, but if not, it's called the reading rope, and it's by Scarborough, and it was in 2001. And what it shows here is, it kind of goes back to the simple view of reading, where on the bottom, this is word recognition. So this would be the first key to unlock that book. And with word recognition, it's a phonological awareness, the decoding, the spelling, the sight recognition. And those three strands get woven together. And then it gets woven into the bigger part of the rope. And the language comprehension is the higher level thinking skills. Very, very important for language comprehension. But it gets built with oral language as well. And then ideally, they're learning to decode, and they can start accessing this language comprehension. Reading really is important for both of these, and you can see it's like increasingly automatic with word recognition, and increasingly strategic with the language comprehension. This is just another model that what are the systems that make up language? And you can see the inner circle: phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics. So once again, your inner circle are the more of the learning how to read. And then it's, we're using what we have with the higher level thinking skills and accessing higher level thinking skills. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about explicit teaching of phonemic awareness. And the idea is that phonemic awareness for young children is very, very important. They often will hear a word and it's co-articulation, and it's a word and it's like all put together. And they need to then break bigger words down into the individual sounds. And the difference between explicit teaching of phonemic awareness and implicit teaching of phonemic awareness is that you're deliberate. You've got a scope and sequence, and you're spending time working on these sounds, as opposed to if it just comes up and then you address it. This slide shows a book, and it's by Wiley Blevins. And if you're interested in phonics, and I hope you are, he takes a fresh look at phonics with a lot of fun, a lot of explanation. He's been in the field for a long, long time, and he looks at what are causes of failure using phonics and what are 7 ingredients for success. That might make a nice book study for your teachers. And what he says is well-crafted phonic lessons are designed to teach students how to map sounds onto spelling. In other words, we're to teach the letters represent sounds in our spoken words. And he also emphasizes that we're giving the student brain tools, and we're giving them brain tools so that they can decode words. And then with building and with increased amount of phonics, and remember, you don't have to have phonics for forever. It's just to teach the students the decoding skills. It allows them to become text independent. This is from Dr. Tim Shanahan, and the question was posed to him, do all kids need phonics? And what his reply was, he said, most kids can learn to read with little or no phonics, and that many kids come to school on their own before reading instruction even begins. But he goes on to say, a minority of students won't learn to read without phonics, and many students would read significantly worse without being taught phonics. And he goes on, the best argument for phonics is that no one is harmed by teaching phonics, and a large subset of students is helped by receiving explicit phonics instruction from kindergarten through 2nd grade. So I thought that was very interesting. My takeaway is that no one is harmed by it, and that there are so many students that either have to have it, or they won't learn to read, or that they would be hurt if they didn't get the instruction. Repetitions, going back to my story of the wise teacher saying that different people needed different repetitions. Yeah, there's neurodiverse brains, and a gifted student might only need 1 to 4 repetitions, where a typical student 4 to 14, a struggling student 14 to 40, and a student who has a learning disability, a reading disability, or is dyslexic, 40 to 200. And this is the student down here that the dyslexic or the struggling student, who you teach them something and it may be gone. And so they really need explicit teaching with the say it, see it, say it, hear it, write it, spell it, use it in a sentence. They have to make these words their own. Continuous blending is a best practice, and research has shown that teachers who spend a larger amount than average on blending get better results. They get better outcomes. And the continuous blending is, instead of going like d, g, you're going d, g, and you're going left to right. So the continuous blending you see there, and the segmenting is when you break it into sounds. Both are good. The Brain Dictionary, I talked a little bit about this. This is the idea that with a lot of practice, words will get stored in your brain dictionary, which is back here. And these are the words that are automatic. You know them just automatically. They're stored in your brain dictionary. What I have here is just an example of how to make automatic words or sight words. Now, a lot of teachers will give their students lists of words to go home and memorize. But ideally, you work with these words. And what's happening here is when there's a sound, you're moving a marker. And so you're segmenting there. This is an example of a heart word. So said, we take it out. And this is the picture. They've got hearts on the hard part. We can sound out s and d, but the that is spelled AI is the tricky part. Going to the right, said, you point and you say the word 3 times, said, said, said. And here, this is called orthographic mapping, when you're putting a sound or a marker for each sound. And then how many sounds? 3. Here we're putting a heart around the AI. And here we're underlining and we're writing it. So here's a trace with a heart around the heart or the irregular part. And then writing it in a sentence. My mom said, let's go to the store. And that gives you practice in context. So be aware of the goal that you desire for accuracy. Do you have a goal of 80%, 90%? This is an example of 80%. And all of these words that are highlighted, the child couldn't read. So 80% accuracy that's too high of a goal if someone is struggling like this. So if there were 100 words, that means the person is getting 20 wrong. And then this is 90. That's a little bit better, but you can see how this would affect comprehension and frustration. So metacognition is thinking about your thinking. It's your mental problem solving to understand text, both digital and print. So now when you're getting into this metacognition, this is the higher level. That's the language comprehension. So it's important that we read with students and we read aloud with them. And it's good to point out the words. You can see that it's a cooperative process here. And by reading to students, you're visualizing or you're encouraging visualizing, tapping into both the verbal and the nonverbal visual spatial neural systems. And what does it do? It makes abstract concepts more concrete, meaningful, and memorable. I'm going to skip this for right now, but know that students really going into 4th grade, they need these foundational skills. And our scores in Illinois, we really need to work on improving reading. So as an educator, you need to know your impact. You're a brain builder, a neurodesigner, a reading bolter, neuronal engineer, a cognitive coach, a brain developer, cognitive designer, and I'm sure you can think of others and probably more creative than me. So what does reading do? Reading provides wings to soar. And what do we learn from Seuss? We learn the joy of words and pictures at play, of course, but also the best and most humane values any of us wish to possess: pluck, determination, tolerance, reverence for the earth, the fundamental value of the imagination. And that is why early reading matters. And that's from Michael Dirda. That concludes my presentation.
Excellent. Carol, thank you so much for sharing all this information and research on the brain and reading with us today. Appreciate the story in the middle as well. Terrific job. It's almost 4 o'clock, but if we do have any questions, you can raise your hand to unmute your microphone or type into chat. We will stay with you until 4 o'clock just to make sure there aren't any questions coming out. I did see something come into Q&A. Let's see. Okay. Just letting everyone know that, yep, it'll conclude at 4 p.m. And Carol, we will share out the recording. Good question, Sharon. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Carol, is it okay for me to share your slides as a PDF with the attendees tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, there you go, Sharon. I'll be sending out the recording link as well as a link to download Carol's PowerPoint as a PDF as well.